It is 9:07 in the evening. The sea is black. The air is freezing. And somewhere in the darkness of the English Channel, a massive ocean liner is dying and almost nobody knows it. No distress rockets lighting the sky. No panicked radio calls echoing across the Atlantic. Just silence, and then nothing. Over 1,000 people are on board. She has lifeboats for barely half of them. And in less than an hour, she will be gone, swallowed whole by the sea without so much as a photograph, a headline, or a name on the evening news. She was the Britannic, sister ship to the most famous vessel in human history. And what happened to her on the night of November 21st, 1916, was covered up, disputed, and buried beneath the weight of a world already drowning in war. The White Star Line never planned to build just one dream ship. Their vision was three: an empire of steel sailing back and forth across the Atlantic, carrying the wealthy and the hopeful to new worlds. The first was the Olympic, launched in 1911. The second was the Titanic, launched that same year. And the third, the Britannic, was their masterpiece. She was everything the Titanic was supposed to be, only better, bigger, safer, built with the lessons of disaster welded directly into her hull. Her double hull ran higher. Her watertight compartments were redesigned. They gave her enough lifeboats for every single soul on board. She was, on paper, unsinkable in a way the Titanic never truly was. She was launched in February 1914, and she never carried a single paying passenger. Not one. Because before she could begin her glamorous career, the world went to war. By August 1914, the guns of Europe were firing, and the White Star Line handed her over to the British government. She was repainted, her gleaming black hull replaced with a military gray, red crosses marking her sides. She became HMHS Britannic, His Majesty's hospital ship, one of the largest ever deployed. She made 5 voyages into the Mediterranean, crossing cold, gray waters, ferrying the broken bodies of young men back from the carnage of Gallipoli and the Eastern Front. She was not a warship. She carried doctors, nurses, and orderlies. She was protected under the Geneva Convention. She was, by every definition, a vessel of mercy. And then someone decided to kill her anyway. On November 12, 1916, the Britannic departed Southampton for her 6th and final voyage. She was heading for the Aegean Sea to collect more wounded from the Greek island of Lemnos. On board were 1,066 people: crew, medical staff, nurses, and officers. One of those nurses had a name history would remember. Her name was Violet Jessop, and Violet Jessop had already survived something most people could barely imagine. She had been on the Titanic when she sank. She had climbed into a lifeboat and watched that ship disappear beneath the waves. Now, for years later, she was sailing on the Titanic's sister ship, heading into the Aegean Sea, and fate was not finished with her yet. November 21st, 1916, 8:12 in the morning. The Britannic is moving at speed through the Kea Channel, between the Greek mainland and the island of Kea. The sea is calm. The sky is clear. The breakfast tables are being set. Some of the nurses have opened the portholes to let in the morning air, a decision that, within minutes, will prove catastrophic. Then, without warning, without any sound of an approaching vessel, without any visual sign of danger at all, the ship shakes. A massive explosion rips through her forward starboard side. Then, less than a minute later, a second explosion. The floor tilts. The lights flicker, and Captain Charles Bartlett, standing on the bridge, already knows the truth that everyone else on this ship is only just beginning to understand. She's going down. Here is where the story stops making sense. Because nobody, not the British government, not the German Navy, not the historians who have spent decades studying this wreck, can fully agree on what actually caused those explosions. The official explanation was a German mine. The Germans themselves insisted it was a torpedo fired by the submarine U-73, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Gustav Seyss. Seyss had laid mines in the Kea Channel just days earlier, on November 15th. So perhaps the ship hit one of his mines. Or perhaps his submarine was still lurking in those waters, waiting. What makes this more than just a historical footnote is what came next. Because if the Britannic was a hospital ship, clearly marked, unarmed, protected by international law, then sinking her was a war crime, and nobody wanted to admit to it. The Germans said it was a mine, no responsibility, just an accident of war. The British said the same. The truth has never been officially settled, and the wreck, sitting in 400 feet of water off the coast of Greece, still holds the answer. But the cover-up, if that is what it was, goes deeper still. Within days of the sinking, questions were being asked that the British government moved quickly to silence. Witnesses reported that some portholes had been opened that morning, allowing water to flood the lower decks at a rate nobody had planned for. Those open portholes, combined with watertight doors that failed to fully seal, may have accelerated her sinking dramatically. The ship went down in just 55 minutes. The Titanic had taken 2 hours and 40 minutes. The Britannic was supposed to be better, and yet she sank nearly 3 times faster. Why? Because the inquiry into her loss was held in secret. Not publicly like the Titanic inquiry. In secret, away from the press, away from families, away from anyone who might ask uncomfortable questions about negligence, about procedure, about why a ship built to survive disaster didn't. And then there is the question of the lifeboats. Captain Bartlett gave the order to stop the engines before the lifeboats were lowered. But the order came too late, or was ignored, or was never fully carried out. 2 lifeboats on the starboard side were lowered into the water while the Britannic was still moving forward at speed. The ship's massive propellers were still turning, still churning the water. The lifeboats were dragged into them. Both were destroyed. 30 people were killed not by the explosion, not by drowning, but by their own ship's propellers. They had done everything right. They had followed the procedure. They had gotten into the lifeboat, and the lifeboat had become a death trap. Among those pulled from the wreckage of those lifeboats was Violet Jessop, her second maritime disaster, her second escape from the impossible. She described later how she jumped from the lifeboat at the last second, how something struck her head so hard beneath the water that she didn't fully understand she was alive until hours later. Doctors examining her after the war would discover that she had, in fact, suffered a fractured skull that day and never knew it. She survived the Titanic. She survived the Britannic. She would go on to live to the age of 83. The sea took everything from her and gave her back every single time. Her story alone deserves a film, but the world never made one. Because the Britannic story was inconvenient. A hospital ship sunk by a war crime that nobody could prove or admit, carrying nurses and doctors, going down faster than the Titanic, with lifeboats turned into killing machines, in the middle of a war that was already destroying an entire generation of young men, was not a story that helped anyone. It did not inspire recruitment. It did not strengthen morale. It was buried, quietly, deliberately, efficiently buried. The secret inquiry produced a report that has never been fully released. Portions remain classified to this day. The ship was listed as a loss. The families were notified, and the world moved on to the next disaster. There were so many to choose from. The Britannic sat on the floor of the Aegean Sea, untouched for nearly 60 years. It was Jacques Cousteau who found her in 1975, exactly where the surviving charts said she would be. She is, remarkably, largely intact, unlike the Titanic, which was torn apart by the pressure of deep water and a century of decay. The Britannic rests in relatively shallow water, her hull still recognizable, her grand staircase still standing inside the rusting wreck. Divers have explored her, researchers have studied her, and what they have found has only deepened the mystery. The damage to her hull suggests an external explosion, but the pattern of that damage has been used to argue both for a mine and for a torpedo. The wreck itself refuses to give a clean answer. In 2009, a team of researchers using advanced sonar and remote vehicles produced a new survey of the wreck site. They found something that had not been reported in any official account. Evidence suggesting the explosion may have triggered secondary detonations from inside the ship. What was stored in those forward holds? The official manifest said medical supplies. The official manifest for the Titanic said There was nothing of extraordinary value in her cargo hold either. History has a habit of lying through its paperwork. There is one more detail that almost never makes it into the history books, and it is perhaps the strangest of all. A woman named Sheila Macbeth Mitchell was also on board the Britannic that morning. She had previously sailed on the Olympic, the first of the three sister ships, during an incident in 1911 when the Olympic collided with a British warship and nearly sank. 3 ships, 3 disasters, and somehow, certain names kept appearing in the passenger and crew lists, voyage after voyage, catastrophe after catastrophe, as if some people were simply magnetized toward the most dramatic moments of the age. The White Star Line's 3 great ships did not just share steel and blueprints. They shared a kind of terrible gravity, a pull toward the dark, and yet that gravity never made the front pages. Not once, not for the Britannic. The last survivor with direct memory of that morning died decades ago. The secret inquiry report sits in an archive, portions sealed, portions missing. The German Navy's own records from 73 were captured after the war and then quietly filed away. And the Britannic herself lies in the Aegean, 400 feet down, slowly rusting, slowly collapsing, her story told only by the cold geometry of broken steel. Over 1,000 people were on that ship. Only 30 were killed. By any measure, the survival rate should be called a miracle. But when you look at what the British government did immediately afterward, the secret inquiry, the suppressed testimony, the classified report, the deliberate silence that followed a ship full of nurses and doctors sinking in wartime, you start to wonder if the miracle itself was the problem. If everyone had died, there would have been no witnesses. No nurses to remember which portholes were open. No officers to recall the lifeboat order that came too late. No Violet Jessop to quietly fracture her skull and survive to tell the story another day. The sea took the Titanic and gave the world a legend. It took the Britannic and gave the world a secret. The difference between the two was not the size of the disaster. It was not the number of lives lost. It was not even the ship itself. The only difference was a world already on fire, a government that needed the story to quietly disappear, and an ocean deep enough to swallow the truth along with the steel. One ship became immortal. The other was simply erased. And the difference between a legend and a secret is simply who controls the story.